Today's guest was born into a devoutly Roman Catholic family. After a brief tour of duty in the Navy, he entered Notre Dame College and received a degree in journalism. He worked as a reporter for 1 year, then he felt a calling to the priesthood. He entered the Benedictine seminary, and after 8 years, he came to the conclusion that he did not have a vocation to the priesthood. He left the order and then went back to Notre Dame, where he was a professor, and he taught at another college as well, and finally joined a public relations firm. He was married in 1965. In 1973, at the time his fourth child was about to be born, Roe versus Wade was passed. My guest was shocked. At that point, he dedicated his life to protecting the unborn and to fighting this dreadful decision. He started in 1980 the Christian organization, the Pro-Life Action League in Chicago. The Pro-Life Action League has been responsible for shutting down nearly 100 abortion clinics and has, as a result, saved thousands of lives. He has written a book called Closed, 99 Ways to Stop Abortion. And finally, he has produced a video called Meet the Abortion Providers. Patrick Buchanan, presidential candidate, has described him as the Green Beret of the pro-life movement. I'd like to welcome to What Catholics Believe Mr. Joe Scheidler, director of the Pro-Life Action League. Also with us is Father William Jenkins, pastor of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Church in Parma, Ohio, and editor and publisher of the Roman Catholic. Joe, last time you were with us, we ran out of time, and you were just going to relate a story to us, which you promised you'd do this week.
Right, we got caught right in the middle of, we were talking about how you dissuade people from having abortions. Father had asked the question, and I was saying that basically you let the Holy Spirit tell you what to say. And I remember in the one case, I addressed the young man, and I pulled my wallet out of my pocket, and I said, hey, I've got this little boy, and I pulled out a picture of Matt, my little kid. He was just a kid at the time. I said, you know, he's learning baseball, and he will come up to me, and I'll tell him how good he is and all that stuff. He put his arms around me, call me daddy. I said, you know, you got a little child too, maybe a little boy, a little girl, but I'll tell you what it's going to look like in about an hour. And I pulled out of the other part of my wallet the macerated picture, the picture of a macerated baby. I said, this little boy is never going to put his arms around you. This little girl is never going to say, I love you, Daddy. You're going to kill your own child. I said, you know, Hitler didn't even do that. This was the hard, I just felt, and the guy was mesmerized. He'd never thought of it as a child, as a little boy, little girl. It was just a problem. And he got his girlfriend and said, we can't do this, and they walked away. So you never know. You never know what it's going to be. So I always carry pictures of my kids, because for some reason, people will look at pictures of your kids. Now, you wouldn't know this, Father, but people will look at pictures of your children, and that gets the conversation going. What you're buying is time. That's why Operation Rescue is so good. It blocks the abortion clinic entrance long enough that you can talk to women. We talked 6 women out of abortions one day while we were in front of the abortion clinic with a block of cement, with a couple of people attached to it, and they couldn't get in. The women were coming for their abortions. They couldn't go anywhere. We talked them out of abortion. You're buying time, because people, for the most part, do not want an abortion. They want to get rid of a problem. They think the baby's a problem. Everything else is the problem, not the baby.
You know, my wife was formerly a registered nurse, and she was kind of astounded by an incident which changed her thinking on a subject. One woman had just had an abortion at this hospital, and then she came out and she said, I can't believe it. It looked like a baby. I'd like to bring up a picture on the screen. This is a picture of an aborted baby being held in forceps. And again, I mean, lest anyone have any questions, it really is a baby. It's just not a mass of flesh or a tumor. But what I was going to ask you about, Joe, is what about Operation Rescue? What is it trying to accomplish? It's certainly been vilified to a great extent in the press, and what are its tactics?
Well, rescue, you know, is not really a new idea. We had rescues back in the 70s. There was a great bunch down in St. Louis. Joan Andrews, back in the early 70s, was down there rescuing. We learned from Sam Lee and John Ryan how to do it. They came to Chicago. You're rescuing children being taken into an abortion clinic to have their heads cut off or to be burned to death or whatever, and you stop from going in by sitting in front of the door, going into the clinic, and we've locked ourselves to the stirrups so they can't even get on the table. There are different ways of doing it. I've been in the clinics. It used to be easy back in the old days. We'd go in and sit around and stuff the magazines with pro-life literature and pass out little fetal models and talk to the girls right in the clinics. It's tough now. But when rescue really came of age back in the late 80s with Randy Terry, and Randy and I worked together. I used to go down to Binghamton, New York, and when he was just picketing and running a crisis pregnancy center. But rescue has brought an awful lot of people into the movement. A lot of people were not even active, and they saw they could do something. And they came in as rescuers, and you get arrested. I've been arrested about 15 times, which is nothing nowadays.
Peanuts.
I've been in jails from California to New York and Chicago, and it's not that bad. But the thing is, rescue is a witness. The abortionists don't rescue. The abortionists don't get arrested if they can avoid it. I've seen them when they've come to do something and the police say, you get out of here, you'll be arrested, they leave. We don't. We stay there because we are more committed and we become witnesses, which is another word for martyr. You're a martyr for the cause because we really believe in the value of these children's lives. I think rescue has its place. I have supported rescue. The only thing I worry about is that it brought so much attention on the clinics and all. The police are getting more violent, and the laws are getting tougher.
I was going to ask you about that. I understand that that these people who participate in these so-called rescues are subject to increasingly barbaric treatment by the law enforcement authorities.
Unfortunately, some police get carried away and they've broken arms and they've tried all kind of pain compliance and used the nunchucks and everything, and it's been bad. I've known people who have been seriously hurt at these abortions, and we're passive, we're peaceful. When you see violence at an abortion clinic, it's the abortionists, it's the death scorch, and it's the police. It's not us. You have never seen a pro-lifer strike out. You have never seen violence from us. But when you see all this milieu going on, people moving around, it looks like we're all violent, and we're not. And I'm upset by the image that even some pro-lifers have of rescue, that we're violent. We're not. Before you take part in a rescue, you have to sign an affidavit that you will remain passive, prayerful, and peaceful. And you are. I've been to dozens and dozens of rescues, and I've never seen a pro-lifer become violent. I have seen them beaten, I've seen them tortured, I've seen them dragged away, and I've seen when you don't get up, it may look like you're being violent because the police are pulling you around. The violence is done to us, and the violence is done to the babies. And there's no violence like the violence that goes on inside that death mill.
Joe, what was I going to ask you? You know, we're talking about the rescues. What can we expect now that President Clinton is in office, a man whose one of whose prime planks was pro-aggressive, pro-choice, absolutely unrestricted abortion? His wife felt the same way. What can the pro-life advocates expect now that he is in power?
Well, we're expecting the worst, obviously. He's already signed 5 executive orders promoting abortion, breaking down, as I said in the last program, the efforts of 20 years of pro-life action in the courts and in the legislature. But he also has indicated he will go after us. And there are already introduced or being introduced into the Congress of the United States federal laws that would make it a crime to try to keep a woman from having an abortion. And while they're saying now blocking entrances, they're talking about demilitarized zones, zones where you cannot get within so many yards or feet of the clinic. You cannot give the woman a flyer, a leaflet, talk to her unless she wants to be. I've been before 2 congressional subcommittees on this issue, and it's very clear that Charlie Schumer and John Conyers and Don Edwards and Pat Schroeder and people like that in the Congress want laws that would make it a federal crime of harassment just to talk to a woman, just to hand her a flyer. So we're going, and Clinton would sign these bills. So we're in for some tough times.
I remember seeing a videotape of your appearance before one of these congressional committees, and one thing which struck me, and I think this is actually a characteristic of the whole pro-death movement, is that your interrogators, if I may use the word,
yeah, that's a good word,
scoffed. They scoffed at this concept of a higher law. I think what to me is very disturbing is this whole thing is going in the direction of the state becoming God, and you know, they will have absolute power over life and death.
Well, they do. See, that's the problem. When you get rid of God, you become God. That's the trouble with a totalitarian state, and that's what we are. Don't be misguided by the fact that we still have "In God We Trust" on our coins, and that we give some lip service to God, you know, because we are a godless nation. I just got back from Russia. They're much more godly over there in a country that's been trained in atheism for 75 years than we are. We don't believe in God, and certainly most of our legislators don't, because, as you say, if they get rid of God, they become God, and they scoff at the idea of a higher law. They mock it. They ridicule it. I know Charlie Schumer said to me, "My God says abortion's all right, and your God says it isn't. Whose God do we listen to?" And I said, "There's only one God." And he said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Well, it says in Scripture, the Lord thy God is one God, and him only shalt thou serve." And he thought that was a joke. And it was interesting to me that, you know, when they talk about separation of church and state, boy, they mean the state is all. It's not separation, it's elimination of church, elimination of God.
You're watching what in our introduction that you had produced a video called Meet the Abortion Providers. And I'd like to turn to it again. Last week we saw a brief excerpt, and I'd like to go to another excerpt. Maybe again you can just tell us a little bit about it.
Well, Meet the Abortion Providers was filmed in Chicago as a result of my desire that my activists learn three things: that the abortionists know what they're doing, they're killing a baby; that the abortionists also are affected by our activities, they quit being abortionists; and also that grace is abundant and you can bring these people back. And everybody I had on the program were former abortionists. But they told us what abortion was like, and they showed us what it was like. And it's been a very powerful film. It's been shown all over. It's now been translated into French and Spanish, and I've got Igor Guzov out over in Moscow translating it into Russian, and we're going to have everybody see this film sooner or later.
Here we are, Meet the Abortion Providers.
We use that ultrasound machine on a daily basis. And again, it's like I say, yes, as a doctor, you know that these are children, you know that these are human beings with arms and legs and heads, and they move around and they're very active. But you get reminded every time you put that scanner down on somebody's uterus, you're reminded, because you see the children in there, hearts beating, arms flinging. We have a ball with it. It's a lot of fun.
But I think the greatest thing that got to us was the ultrasound. That time, the ultrasound, or the sound wave picture, which was moving, called real-time ultrasound, showed the baby really on TV. The baby really came alive on TV and was moving. And that picture of the baby on the ultrasound bothered me more than anything else. Because, as I didn't know then really, you bond with that picture. Women get those pictures even if they're still pictures, and boy, it's their baby, and they put it up on the walls, they bring it in and show it to me. And the nurses that had to help with this had to look at this to stage how far along the D&E was, because you got paid more if it was, you know, 16 weeks, if it was more if it was 18 weeks, and so on. In other words, the larger the pregnancy, the more you got paid. And the more the clinic got also. So it was very important for us to do that, and to make sure they weren't too large for us to do when we started. We lost 2 nurses. They couldn't take looking at it. Some other staff lost. The turnover got greater, you know, when we started doing the D&Es, and mostly, as I said, the ultrasounds. So I think the ultrasound was one of the keys there. The other thing, too, is, of course, the women who are having the abortions are never allowed to look at the ultrasound. And because we knew even if they heard the heartbeat, that many times they wouldn't have the abortion. And then we even with that, you know, no money in that.
Joe, you've mentioned in the past that, or I think everyone is aware of this, that among the feminists, something which is very high on their agenda is the abortion issue. Why is this?
Well, there are various reasons for it. Some women just think they need abortion so they can stay in the workforce. They want to be like men. That's one reason in Russia that they introduced abortion in 1920, so that these women could work in the factories and work in the fields and so on and never be pregnant. Of course, now they're having trouble. They're rewarding women for getting pregnant because they've gotten used to having abortions. But another reason is it's an empowering thing to have the power over life and death. I've heard women actually say, I would get pregnant just to have an abortion, to show that I have this power. And that's a consideration. Also, it is some reason they feel that, that it makes them more equal. Men don't get pregnant, and so women don't want to be pregnant or don't want to stay pregnant. They want that option, and they always talk about who decides. We just saw a baby moving in the womb. They don't even deny that it's a baby anymore. Most of them admit that. They're not stupid. But the point is who decides, and the answer is always the woman decides. Notice what is going on, this idea we have to have women do this, not qualified people necessarily, but a woman, just because she's a woman. Now, I love women, and I think women have been wonderful throughout history, and they've done tremendous things, but not just because they're women. But now we're into a society of symbols. Clinton said he wanted his cabinet to look like America, so you got to have so many women, so many blacks, so many Chicanos. So, well, you can't do that. You'd run out. I mean, you've just got too many. But they're so concerned about symbolism, they're not particularly concerned about substance. And I think that's the trouble with the women's movement, and it's going to be the thing that destroys the women's movement. It's a symbolic movement. It's not real. It's shadows and smoke and mirrors. And I think it's going to do itself in. Besides, it's not the women's movement anyway. It's a tiny fraction of women. Real women don't kill babies.
You know, Joe, to me, what never ceased to be a source of amazement is the fact that it's not enough to have abortion. You have to have it completely without any qualifications, and anything that would, in the slightest way, restrict or even maybe hammer on someone's conscience has to be eliminated. I know there's been a number of cases, one in California a number of years ago, where someone happened upon a dumpster which contained 17,000 aborted babies. Another case was another dumpster which had 5,000 babies. So the people involved tried to bury these babies, and lo and behold, I believe it was one of these liberal groups sued them in order to prohibit them from doing this. Now, what's wrong with them? What's so horrible about burying aborted babies?
Well, we're the group in Chicago that found the 5,000, and we are being sued by the National Organization for Women and a chain of abortion clinics for extortion and for racketeering, because we have made it difficult now when you bury somebody, that indicates there's something valuable there. So usually you throw the garbage in landfill or something, and that's what they want to happen to the baby. Just throw them in landfill. They're biological waste. When you bury someone, that gives a dignity to them, and they don't want that. They don't want anybody to be told that what they aborted was valuable, was a human being. And we had a beautiful burial in Chicago. Cardinal Bernardine came out and said a beautiful mass, and we had the burial in the Queen of Heaven Cemetery. And the abortionists were furious, and as I say, they sued us for that, because that makes it more difficult for a woman to have an abortion. They do not want the identity of a human life to be imposed on this child. They think that's what we do. Actually, the human life is there, and we simply recognize it.
Joe, President Clinton has made one of his first acts as president the signing of a number of executive orders. He has also indicated that he would sign FOCA, the Freedom of Choice Act. Maybe you could tell us something about this. One of the orders, I believe, dealt with the experimentation with human fetuses.
Yes.
What is involved with that?
Well, you know, people have an idea that you can go to an abortion clinic and pull a dead baby out and use its parts. That is nonsense. They don't want babies that have been aborted. They want babies being aborted, carefully orchestrated, because the parts of the bodies they want, which for the most part are the brain cells, must be alive. They must be taken while the baby is alive. So they will monitor this abortion. When the baby is still alive, trapped in the birth canal, they will insert a kind of a cannula, stick it in the baby's head, and suck the brains out while that baby is alive. Dead brain cells aren't worth anything. They have no value at all. So what these legislators don't know and won't believe, and what probably even Clinton doesn't know, is that these babies must be alive when their body parts are taken, or they're of no use at all. Dead parts aren't any good. Consequently, we're talking here about murder and human experimentation that is as macabre and horrendous as anything Adolf Hitler's doctors did. And this is now something that Clinton says he's encouraging. He's lifted the ban on it. Now they got to get federal money, our tax money, to experiment and take parts from live human beings. We are talking some of the most dastardly, inhuman, draconian activity we can think of, and it's going to be at taxpayers' expense.
You know, I've even come across some bizarre futuristic novels. One can even go back to something not quite as bizarre as Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where they literally had factories where babies were bred. And I recall reading something where someone was so shocked to see this at a medical school, and I believe it was a true fact, that they saw the heads of babies somehow being kept alive. They were aborted babies, and they were being kept alive. I mean, this is a nightmare world we're living in. This is real.
Well, we have pictures of things that would just turn your stomach, and they figure that a baby, if it's old enough, see, they've got to let these parts develop, and they'll watch these women, and they're talking about, oh, well, the woman won't even know the doctor, and they won't be paid for it. Nonsense. When they have the go-ahead to do this, they're going to nurture that baby in the womb up until its organs are properly developed. Then they're going to use all the organs they can get. We already have the case out at one of the teaching schools where they cut the baby's liver out, pulled the baby out alive, cut its liver out, no anesthesia, of course. They would use it on animals, but not on babies, and then let the baby die. Didn't even sew it back up. This is happening. It's going to happen. It is something that I think Americans should get down on their knees and pray that somehow the funds are not granted for this activity. The bill's already signed. Clinton took care of that very early on. He promised the ladies he'd do that. He's promised a lot of other things, too.
Father Jenkins, how do you feel as a Catholic priest, this injustice that we Catholics have to pay our hard-earned tax dollars to support this kind of activity?
How do I feel about
Yes.
that? Well, it's horrific, obviously. You can't do it. You cannot support something like this, that's for sure. Well, it's just, you know, paying the tab for murder is all it is. Mm-hmm. And it's something that really does affect the consciences of Catholics. But, you know, all this talk about freedom of choice and conscience and all the rest, that doesn't apply to us because they see us the same way they see aborted children. They look at us the same way they regard preborn children. We have no voice, and we're invisible. 250,000 people walked down Constitution Avenue back January 22nd, 1993. We're invisible. We are less human than Dred Scott was, according to the Supreme Court decision back in 1850, whatever. He at least it was said he was 2/5 of a person. But we weren't even given the benefit of being 2/5 of a person because we were told that there were only 75,000 people. That's the official Park Service estimate. Mm-hmm. So we're not even 2/5 of a person. We are, in their eyes, just like aborted children. If they will abort children, they will lie, they will steal, they will cheat, they will do anything necessary, and they will not let anyone or anything get in their way. And if we stand in their way, they will abort us too. And they'll use us for experimentation too. Dr. Mengele rides still. He's still alive today.
Yeah.
You've been watching What